switch?
Yep.
It's on.
It is on?
Yes.
God be praised. Y'all, let's all take a deep, healing, conscious breath. And I invite you to take a few more of those. Deep, healing, conscious breath is different from that shallow breath. Deep, healing breath takes us into our belly, the core of our being. Our entire body relaxes with that deep breath. Brings us into present moment, not thinking about future or past, simply being in this moment, in this place. We sense those sitting around us, and we sense our place in this community, in this moment, at this time. We have many communities. Today we share with this assembly of ageless, eternal, timeless beings of light. I invite you to listen to a brief reading from Catholic priest Anthony DeMello from the Song of the Bird. So once again, we breathe into the core of our being. This is entitled Dandelions. A man who took great pride in his green lawn found himself with a large crop of dandelions. He tried every method he knew to get rid of them. Still, they plagued him. Finally, he wrote the Department of Agriculture. He enumerated all the things he had tried and closed his letter with the question, "What shall I do now?" In due course, the reply came, "We suggest you learn to love them." Some of us have been there. Some of us are there now with all kinds of dandelions popping up in our gardens that we think should not be there. Dandelions popping up in our thoughts, in our lives, in our finances, in our relationships, in our world events, issues of such magnitude that we sometimes just simply ask, what can we do? And so many of the sages and saints of the world suggest we learn to love what is. That we be a presence of love in the midst of the dandelions. So this morning I invite each one of us with that deep breath to go into the core of our being and simply let our consciousness bring to us any things that are popping up that feel like weeds, that you feel shouldn't be happening, shouldn't be there. And let us surround those events, circumstances, people with our love, with our prayer, with the idea of oneness. We are one with even that feels hard to love and appreciate. And so for these few moments of silence, we deepen into oneness, especially with the people, places, and events that we feel shouldn't be there in our garden. us with and to wrap up with love. People, events, circumstances that we feel are hard to love right now, hard to hold in the consciousness of love. So we bless ourselves. What is it that Spirit has placed into your life in this moment to receive your loving attention? You're the light of the world and you know what to do. We give thanks for remembering this. We bless our community, people that we're holding in our hearts, people who are in struggle right now, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. We bless all of our beloveds, near and far, our entire human family, near and far. Those we know to be in struggle on many levels. And we ask always what is ours to do in the practical and in the spiritual. And we say, so it is, and so we let it be. Namaste. Once again, spiritual word, there's a reason we say amen. And as our friend Richard Levy says, amen, women, children. Bless thee all of it. So, have you ever had dandelions in your garden? Oh, yeah. We now know not to use Roundup. Are we clear on that? I was walking through our neighborhood a few years ago, and there was a lawn that I knew to be a very green lawn, and I noticed that there were a few dandelions popping up. And then a few weeks went by, and I walked back through that little part of the neighborhood, and the whole lawn was covered with dandelions. And I thought, how wonderful. And I wondered how his neighbors felt. Because, you know, there's this thing about green lawn. I gave that up years ago, for many reasons. This lawn was covered with dandelions. So as I turned, I went around the culvert, and I came back, and this man was out in the yard. And I was getting ready to speak to him, telling him, I really love your dandelions. But before I could, his little daughter came running out. And the wife had the video camera. And the little girl, maybe 3 or 4, was running through the yard picking the dandelions with little stems about that long. You know, you've gotten those little bouquets from children, right? Here they are, a little sweaty hand. And you go, oh, you make more with those little bouquets than you do store-bought flowers, right? And she was in glee. She was thrilled. And I had this, I didn't want to disturb it. This family that was being thrilled with the dandelions. I just observed that this father was in glee watching his daughter be in glee with weeds. Now, what's the good thing about dandelions? They support the bees and the butterflies. You can eat the greens. What?
You can make wine.
You can make wine. You want to everybody see Dan for that one? You can eat the greens. You don't want to eat the ones on the side of the road where the car exhaust has been on them, but dandelion greens are very healthy. And they support the bees and the butterflies. We all know that's important. So sometimes there's dandelions popping up, and we think they should not be there. Am I right? There are some things popping up in the world right now that we think should not be happening. They should not be there. And I'm on the list of people who have a hard time sometimes with the things going on in the world. I have to practice constantly to be an appreciation of what Reverend Marilyn Maddox is teaching every Sunday morning in the Sunday Morning Circle with this book, Whatever Arises, love that. Whatever arises, love that. That's not easy. It's just not easy. So today we're talking about shared compassion. That's funny. heavy hurricanes. I suggested to City of Myrtle Beach they put that thing in storage and haul it out for every hurricane. Because that was the best laugh therapy ever, wasn't it? I'm sure the owner was not laughing that much, but we had compassion with the owner. Okay, so compassionate connection, what does this mean? An understanding of the heart in which we see the beauty and the divine alive in others. Is that easy? So I go back to one of my biggest examples for doing this, and that would be Jesus. It would be anybody who has a compassionate heart, who's able to look at the dandelion person, to look at the person who appears to be a weed in the garden, who appears to be the mistake, who appears to be the troublemaker, the events and circumstances that appear to be heartbreaking and struggling, and we're constantly judging. This is bad, this is good, this shouldn't be happening. What in the world's happening? I told my chiropractor, I don't need you right now, my neck is so loose because I just do this all the time. Right? Seeing the divine in others when, as the Bible says, they spitefully use you. Being an appreciation of the light within someone who appears to be spitefully using other people, the earth. So we just have to keep constantly taking a deep breath. It's actually a wonderful way to deal with that. So sometimes people's language and behavior make it hard for us to see their divinity. But the more important thing is our own behavior sometimes makes us think that we're not so much connected with divinity. Am I right? How many of us have a dent in our forehead and go, oh, I can't believe I did that again. Oh, did I really say that? Right? And it can go back 40, 50 years. Oh, I can't believe I actually did that. So sometimes we can't see our own brilliance. So we have to remember Rabbi Gelberman's prayer. Everybody remember his prayer? Okay, I will help you remember. Oh God, help me to remember the truth about myself. No matter how beautiful it is. That's Rabbi Gelberman. As importantly, oh God, help me to remember the truth about others, no matter how beautiful it is. We could just stay on this for the rest of our time together. Oh God, help me to remember. So for me, it's pretty much constant. I am now in league with Jesus, the Christ who prayed without ceasing. I am constantly beginning again. Thank God I know how to start again. So what allows some of us to stay connected to our compassionate nature? Marshall Rosenberg asked this in his book, Compassionate Conversation or Compassionate Communication. He said, what is it that some people can stay connected to their compassionate nature even in the midst of the most troubling, horrible situations? He says, his answer is, we empty our mind and listen with our whole being. Now, he goes into places where treaties are being negotiated between warring nations, and he's even worked with gang members, warring gangs within a city. And the first thing they do is they sit at the table together and they listen to every person's story. He said that's the part that takes the longest, is to build an atmosphere that creates whole listening, which means I'm not going to listen to you and be working on my rebuttal the whole time I'm listening. I'm going to actually allow my heart and mind to open and hear what you have to say, knowing that you're in the enemy camp, you're on the other side politically, you're not a part of my culture, my group, my way of thinking, my religion, but I'm going to practice this thing and I'm going to open to hearing what you're saying. Beyond all of my generational beliefs, my generational wounding, my ideas of right and wrong, I'm going to go to a place and listen to you in a different way of listening. It's going to require that I empty from my thinking those beliefs that sometimes I act out of so quickly that I don't even know I'm acting out of an old belief. You've read about this? So there's a story in this book by Jack Kornfield, which I'm looking at a lot lately. The subtitle is Illuminating the Path Through Difficult Times. It's called A Lamp in the Darkness. So he tells a story about a young Army lieutenant in an Army-based town, who had an anger management issue, and the judge ordered him to take an 8-week mindfulness class. He was 6 weeks into it when he had a very common experience. It's called the grocery line anxiety. Have you ever been there? He was in a hurry. Sometimes we are. He got behind a woman who had one thing in her cart. She could have been in the express line. And she got to the checkout counter, and she started visiting with the checkout person. And she not only started visiting, but the child the customer was carrying was so cute that she handed the baby over to the checkout person to cuddle and talk with.
Wow.
He could feel the heat and the pain in his body rising. And then he remembered, oh, wait a minute, I'm 6 weeks into a mindfulness class. So he did something that we start every service with. What was that? Took a deep breath. And he began to practice this idea of emptying from his mind all of his judgments, his anger, his anxiety, and be in a place of peace in the midst of what he was feeling. And as he did that, it's a practice. Beatles sang about it, let it be. Let this moment be what it is. Love what's here. Be present to what's here. And he could feel the pain and the heat and the anger slipping away from his body and his mind. He finally got up to the checkout counter. And he looks at the checkout person. He said, that was a really cute kid, wasn't it? She said, you think so? That's my little boy. She said, my husband was in the Army and he was killed a year ago in Afghanistan. So my mother, I now work, and my mother keeps my baby, and she brings him in once a day to see me. That's why she only had one item in her checkout cart. Was this man grateful that he didn't react with his anger? Sometimes it takes us to our knees when we get the whole story, right? It takes us to our knees when we get the whole story of what's going on in somebody's life. Mindfulness helps us deepen into compassion, to be open and available to what's going on in somebody else's life before we judge them and execute them in our thinking, right? So, Fillmore called this place of mindfulness, he called it the one presence. He called it the one power. Charles Fillmore, our co-founder of this entire unity movement, this place of mindfulness, his words were one power, one presence, God, omnipotent, silence. He also referred to it as the place of Jerusalem, metaphysically, Jerusalem, the abode of peace, the presence of peace, the energy of peace. Why would he call it the energy of Jerusalem? Well, Jerusalem is said to be the place where Abraham the father of Israel, that Abraham formed an alliance with Melchizedek, who was a high priest of Salem, the king of peace. He also formed an alliance with a priest called Elion of the Most High God. He was this priest, Melchizedek, the king of peace, and he practiced the Most High consciousness, Most High God, Most High consciousness. So when we think about the idea of Jerusalem, we're thinking about returning or tapping into this place of consciousness called the abode of peace. And in the abode of peace, I'm not judging you. In the abode of peace, I'm not angry with you. In the abode of peace, I'm not blaming you or myself. In the abode of peace, I'm able to love and appreciate the divine within you. So it's important that I seek the abode of peace. Another way Charles Fillmore talked about it, he said when Daniel, was thrown into the lion's den, and while he was in prison, he did something 3 times a day, something they do in the Middle East. He turned toward Jerusalem and he did his prayers. Metaphysically, because unity looks at things metaphysically, he turned his consciousness towards Jerusalem. We turn our consciousness toward the abode of peace. If I don't, then I'm creating more non-peace in the world. So the idea is he kept his windows open towards Jerusalem. So, 24/7, am I keeping the doors of my consciousness open towards Jerusalem or towards the abode of peace? No! That's why I practice non-stop to keep my windows open toward Jerusalem, towards the abode of peace. And, just a little aside, just like our founders named our movement Unity, and boy, do we get a lot of lessons and opportunities to learn to be in unity, don't we? Same thing with Jerusalem, abode of peace. There hasn't been peace there in that area, well, for a long, long time. So we name things according to the high idea, the ideal of what can be. So we turn our thoughts towards Jerusalem. So I was having a conversation with a friend last Tuesday. And we were talking about this idea of how do we stay connected to compassion and empathy and peace, even when everything is, a hurricane. How do we do that? And in speaking together, we hit on this idea that sometimes we feel resigned to a situation, don't we? Resigned to life or resigned to the way things are. Do you know the feeling of resignation?
Oh, yeah.
Anybody?
Oh, yes.
Is it a good feeling?
No.
And I'm still pondering how this works. But what came through is this, that sometimes we feel resigned. Sometimes we have a shift. And we feel assigned. In the midst of some of the most heartbreaking events in our world, we can feel resigned. And I suspect all of us in this room have felt that from time to time. And in that place, we want to quit knowing ourselves as the light of God. We want to quit knowing our brilliance. We just want to quit. Well, when we feel assigned, it turns that to an idea that maybe I am a helping presence. Even when I don't know what to do, I'm still a helping presence by being available to the one mind, the one power, the one consciousness, the oneness. I can still be available to that even though I'm throwing up my hands. I don't know what to do. I can tell you that's where Spirit says, great, now you can listen. We don't know what to do, we empty our minds. We think we have answers, we let the list go. We think we have solutions, and it turns out they're not good solutions at all. So we just have to be available to Spirit, but I want to invite us to go beyond the feeling of being resigned and deepen into this place of, I've been assigned here. Obviously, I'm still here physically. None of us are here without assignment. That is my perspective. So what is my assignment here, in this moment, in this place, at this time, at this event, this circumstance, this person that's hard to love? What is my assignment? And that's for each one of us to answer, but what I'm hoping for is that all of us can be aware wherever we are in our lives, whatever age, whatever circumstances, that the feeling of being resigned, I don't think is the most powerful place for us to be. So it's a temporary feeling. And in the midst of it, my prayer is for all of us that we can feel the assignment, that we've been assigned to be here at this place, this time, this moment, to be a helping presence. It shifts everything for me. I hope it shifts it for you. I've heard statements of resignation a lot recently. And in my own consciousness, there are moments when it would feel far better to pull the sheets up over my head and say, y'all go on without me. Right. So we take a nap and we get back up. I don't think this is the moment to resign. Let's take a deep breath. What are we assigned to today? You know, we're assigned to write our checks for hurricane relief. We're assigned to be in prayer. We're assigned to collect clothes for help for kids and family justice. We're assigned to be some part of hurricane relief. We're assigned to being a helping presence in what appear to be little ways and big ways. But there needs to be a decision that we are assigned to be a helping presence, otherwise we become resigned. So it's a constant review. Let me review again. Let me begin again, knowing that I'm a helping presence. So which one do we feel, resigned or assigned? So in resigned, we feel frightened, afraid, nervous, in a scared place. But it's just one little tweak of that word and it becomes sacred. That's why checking into being assigned, feeling that assignment is so important, because it shifts it from being scared to knowing you're a part of a sacred moment. So in the feeling of assignment, where we feel holy, hallowed, blessed, consecrated, sanctified. Did we plan this today? Because I heard you use the word sanctified early on in the service. I thought, oh Lordy, she's a Pentecostal too. To feel you're in the sacred presence, and to in fact feel you are the sacred presence. Sanctified, that's what that means. So, everybody take a deep breath. We are a helping presence, and there's something happening in the world. Well, there's so many things happening to help us wake up and get our minds right. There's a phenomenon that started happening back in the 90s. You've probably heard of it, but I saw a documentary on it recently. And the documentary is entitled Life Overtakes Me. And it's about a group of refugee children in Sweden. They've given a name to it, resignation syndrome. It's only a 40-minute documentary. I encourage you to take a look at it. These children are from refugee families. Most of the refugees in Sweden are from the Slavic countries, the Balkans, the Soviet Union countries. And they started seeking asylum back in the 90s. They would get to Sweden, and they would have a year to 18 months in the process, and then many of those families were told, no, we cannot keep you after all. They would eventually appeal. But here's one story of one of the children. She was 6 years old when she witnessed her father being beaten because he would not close down his internet company. He was a part of helping information continually flow into that country, and he wouldn't close it down. The authorities came and beat him, put a gun to his head. The little girl witnessed it. And by the time she's 8, they're in Sweden, they're in the appeal process, and she hears her family concerned that they may still be sent back to, in this case, I think it was Yugoslavia. The little girl began to speak less, eat less. She began to sleep more until eventually she just didn't wake up. She just kept, it's not quite a coma, it's more like a hibernation situation. They do not respond to hot or cold or pinpricks. They're just asleep. And they don't wake up sometimes for 7, 8 months. One child in there was still a year later. And then they wake up. And what they're determining is the immense effects of PTSD, of having to flee for their lives, watching their families go through this turmoil, having the uncertainty of a place to be safe, to live their lives. The uncertainty they feel is causing this phenomenon. Now, first it was just Sweden. Now they're seeing it in New Zealand, where they have a huge refugee detention area. In Australia, same thing. Children. And you might call them the canaries in the coal mine. What happens to people with severe PTSD? That's one issue. What happens to children with severe PTSD? What are we? Now, I don't know all the perfect answers, but I know the children are telling us something. The children are exempling something. They've resigned to this idea that it's just not safe to be in the world. Feeling hopelessness. So let's take a deep breath. The good news is these children eventually wake up. The hard news is it's happening to more and more refugee children. What is ours to do? Each one of us personally are guided and inspired to do what is ours to do. One of our Unity ministers, Anna Quintana from Raleigh Unity, is on her way to the southern border to be a translator with an immigration attorney to help some of these people get their asylum papers properly filled out so they can move on with their lives in a good way. I don't know what all the answers are, but here's one of the things that we can be holding in prayer and also speaking to one another about. It's not okay for PTSD to exist in any form. That's my dandelion. It's not okay, but especially with children. Charles Fillmore had an affirmative prayer. I am inspiring my living substance with life and more abundant life, light, and intelligence. This is after that documentary. I went in search of a powerful affirmation. In the midst of this issue, just this one thing in the world, we could talk about many things. In the midst of this issue with the children, what is my most powerful prayer? And for this moment, this is it. Let's say it together, y'all. I am inspiring my living substance with life and more abundant life, light, and intelligence. So when I do that with myself, I'm pulling that in for my whole species. I'm pulling that in for my country. I'm pulling that in for my community. I'm pulling that in for global family. We've become a helping presence. Now I know what I'm talking about next week. So we take a deep breath. And in the midst of all that's going on in the world, there's a decision. You know, some of us grew up with Billy Graham, the hour of decision. Remember that? Well, I feel we're at the hour of decision. We either feel we're assigned to be a helping presence, or we feel resigned that there's not a thing we can do. And I sense this morning that every one of us in this room wants to know ourselves as the helping presence and want to feel our assignment. To be a compassionate presence, to share that compassion with our close and our faraway beloveds. To share that compassion with the most hurtful issues of our time. To be a helping presence, just to be witness, bear witness to what's happening. And in this one case, these children, just bear witness as a holy presence. Hold this in your consciousness of prayer. Resigned or assigned. Our choice.